Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling weaker than before it began? Like every word you spoke drained you. Like speaking didn't set you free. It exposed you. And the worst part, even after saying everything, no one really heard you. Just noise, just egos, just competition disguised as dialogue. You're surrounded by people who shout, interrupt, exaggerate, who decorate their words with artificial confidence. And you, who prefer silence, start to think that makes you weak. But what if it's the opposite? What if silence is actually the language of those who no longer need to prove anything? Nietzsche understood this before anyone else. In a world that worships speech, he chose the abyss. Where everyone talks to fill the void, he stayed quiet to inhabit it. Because truth doesn't need defenders. It only needs to exist. Here comes the hit. The one who talks too much exposes himself. The one who needs to convince has already lost. This video isn't for those who want to win debates. It's for those who are tired of playing the same game. For those who've been underestimated for staying silent. For those who've been called weak for not reacting. Today, you'll learn what no one taught you. Silence isn't submission. It's strategy. It's presence. It's power in its purest form. Used well, silence disarms. It makes the other drown in their own words. It forces them to look at themselves without distraction. Are you ready to change the way you speak, react, and defend yourself? Because when you learn to stop playing the game, you stop being a piece, and you become the board. Every time you feel the need to explain, to justify, to prove you're right, you've already lost. Because there's no greater sign of weakness than begging for your truth to be accepted. Nietzsche saw it with brutal clarity. The urge to convince doesn't come from truth. It comes from fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of being unseen. Fear that others won't approve. What you barely dare to defend within yourself. And do you know what lies beneath that fear? A borrowed morality? An imposed ethic? A silent need to be good, to be understood, to be accepted by a crowd that doesn't even accept itself. Nietzsche called this the morality of the weak. A system designed to keep you controlled, domesticated, obedient, and every time you're desperate to respond, to have the last word to clean up your image, you kneel before that system. But there is another path, one that makes people uncomfortable, one that terrifies, one that frees. It's the path of the one who no longer needs to justify anything, the one who stays silent. While everyone else wears themselves out talking, the one who watches calmly, while others drown in their need to be heard. That, for Nietzsche, is the truly strong one, the one who no longer seeks to win debates because he understands debates are traps, set to trigger the ego and expose its wounds. The one who doesn't respond on impulse because he knows that every word given is energy that will never return. So then, how do you exercise power without speaking? Nietzsche answers with a powerful figure. The Übermensch, a being who has transcended the need to please, who no longer lives in reaction, who carves his own path without asking for permission. And here comes the secret. The power of the Übermensch isn't imposed with words. It's felt in his calm, in the steadiness of his gaze, in the silence that weighs more than any argument. He doesn't need to shout. His presence alone is enough to unsettle, because his center is solid. And a man with a solid center is the greatest threat to a society built on collapse. In the next part, we're going to dismantle this figure, how that presence is built, how that silence is trained, and why real dominance begins. the moment you choose not to speak. Are you ready for your silence to start commanding? Then don't leave. While others shout, he commands respect with a single look. While they explain, he observes. And with that irritating calm, he disarms his opponent without saying a word. Because his silence isn't emptiness. It's a wall. A barrier others try to break through with anxiety, desperately guessing what lies behind it. And in that desperation, they make mistakes. They expose themselves, they lose balance, they reveal more than they intended to. Because they can't handle not knowing. They can't stand not being answered. And there lies the secret. Silence is not passivity. It's pure strategy. It's emotional economy. The Übermensch doesn't react. Because he understands that every word you speak is a resource you give away. Every overflowing emotion is a weakness you put on display. So why does he stay quiet? Because he has nothing to prove. Because his presence already says it all. And more than that, his silence forces others to face themselves, to hear their own noise, to feel their own insecurity. In a world saturated with noise, the one who masters silence becomes king, and Nietzsche knew it. The Übermensch creates his own rules. He doesn't move from guilt. He doesn't yield to social pressure. He doesn't answer to fear. And because of that, he is feared. Because nothing is more destabilizing than a person who can't be manipulated, an individual who doesn't need approval, explanation, or excuses. His silence is a shield, and when he chooses to speak, his words cut like a sword. But here comes the real question. Why does silence make people so uncomfortable? Why do so many take offense when you choose not to react? The answer lies in psychology, and we'll uncover it in the next part. To understand the power of silence, you also have to understand the chaos it triggers in others. And believe me, it's deeper than it looks. Silence is not absence, it's a mirror. And when someone stays quiet, what that mirror reflects is often unbearable. By choosing not to respond, you force the other person to hear themselves, to confront their own contradictions, to defend their ideas without opposition. And that's where they start to tremble. Most people don't speak to express. They speak to protect themselves. They speak to cover the gap between what they say and who they really are. And when you stay silent, you tear that mask away. It's not your noise that exposes them. It's your stillness. You become the mirror that shows them what they didn't want to see. That's why silence cuts deeper than arguments. And that's why we're not done yet. This illusion still needs to be shattered. Even if you say nothing, the one who speaks begins to feel exposed. They squirm, their rhythm breaks, and a quiet panic takes hold. Your silence disrupts the balance they rely on to perform. Far from being a void, your silence becomes a mirror that reflects insecurity, self-doubt, and hidden fear. The brain's amygdala, the fear center, activates. The body tenses. Thoughts start spinning. Is he judging me? Did he catch my lie? Did he realize I'm bluffing? That is the silent force of silence. It doesn't shout, but it pierces. It doesn't hit, but it breaks. Nietzsche saw it before anyone else. Ordinary people react because they need validation, through noise, approval, or agreement. They believe they must defend themselves, explain their stance, protect their image. But the one who has mastered himself doesn't react. He observes. And in observing, he dominates. Every word spoken without necessity is a piece of power given away. Every emotional response is a weak point exposed. That's why silence isn't absence. It's control. There is one type of person who cannot tolerate this. The manipulator. The one who feeds off drama, Who needs your reaction to keep control? When you stay silent, you take away their fuel. They try to provoke you, bait you into reacting. Because if you don't engage, the game doesn't start. That's when silence becomes punishment. A brutal mirror, one that reflects the other without filters, without makeup. One that forces them to face themselves without distraction, and that hurts more than any insult ever could. But silence doesn't just destroy manipulators. It also awakens old wounds. It brings back forgotten traumas, rejections, abandonments, unresolved pain. When there's no noise to distract them, people begin to feel invisible, as if they no longer matter. For an inflated ego, that's unbearable. Silence disarms them. It strips them bare. Because the ego needs impact. It needs effect. If it speaks and you don't flinch, don't shout, don't strike back, then it loses, and that includes you. Staying silent isn't comfortable. It's unnatural in a world that taught you to always defend yourself. Holding your tongue means going against years of emotional conditioning, where you were made to believe that reacting was power. But it's not. Reacting is need. Staying silent when you know you could destroy someone with a single phrase, that is real power. Surgical power. Power that doesn't bleed, but leaves a scar. Now you understand why silence isn't absence. It's a presence so intense, the other person doesn't know how to react. A presence that doesn't need volume to impose itself. A presence that's felt, that's breathed, that weighs on the room. And in the next part, I'll show you how to use it with precision, how to make silence not just a defense, but an active strategy, a weapon that dominates from the shadows. How do you win an argument without speaking a single word? By mastering silence like it's a sharpened blade. The time for observation is over. Now it's time to apply. Because knowledge that isn't used is worthless. It just decorates your ego while you keep losing in silence. From this point on, your silence will no longer be passive. It will be surgical offense, and those who aren't ready will fall to it, without even realizing how they were defeated. The first principle is brutal. Stay silent exactly when everything in you wants to scream. Your body will crave defense. Your pride will demand explanation. Your mind, addicted to noise, will search for a response. But you will give them nothing, because you know that impulse is the real chain. The urge to explain, to justify yourself, to win with words, is weakness dressed up as nobility. And every time you give in to that urge, you hand away your power. True silence is only born when you no longer need anyone to understand you. When you realize your worth doesn't depend on others grasping it. That's the tense void where the kind of presence is forged that doesn't explain itself, yet imposes itself without effort. The second principle is observation. While others drown in their own words, you watch. Not like someone listening to reply, but like a surgeon searching for the exact point to cut. Every word the other person says is a clue. Every contradiction, a tremor. Every pause, a crack. And you don't do anything, yet. You record, absorb, remember, because if you do decide to speak, it will be like a scalpel, precise, brief, and devastating. Silence gives you the advantage of preparation. They think you know less because you say less. They don't realize you're 5 moves ahead. The third principle, the sustained pause. Prolonged silence isn't absence, it's pressure. A pressure the other person doesn't know how to handle. When you wait and don't react, when your face gives no clues, when your body stays still, the collapse begins. The other starts filling the void with their own anxiety. They contradict themselves. They repeat. They unravel. Because your silence left them no way out. You gave them nothing to grab onto, and a well-executed void is a cliff for the insecure ego. And the fourth principle, perhaps the most feared, unpredictability. When you master silence, no one knows what to expect from you. There's no pattern, no script, and that destabilizes. People start holding back. They tone down their aggression because they no longer control the rhythm. They don't own the tempo. Power over you. You've broken the choreography. And when that happens, the center of gravity shifts. Now everything revolves around you, even when you say nothing. Do you see it? Silence stopped being a defense. It became territory, a trap, a strategy. And if you stay with me in the next part, I'll show you how that silence, once it becomes a habit, not only transforms conversations, it transforms your image, your aura, your presence, because you're no longer the one who answers, you're the one no one can ignore. But be careful. Don't mistake silence for passivity. Nietzsche never praised weakness. The silence we're talking about here isn't retreat. It's not helplessness. It's a pause loaded with tension, a living strategy, a sharpened weight. It's that exact moment where you're not stepping back. You're choosing your position with the coldness of someone who knows they don't need to be seen to be in control. And when the perfect moment comes, when others are already exhausted from speaking, shouting, exposing themselves, you speak. One sentence, not a louder response, a more real one, a precise word that cuts like a blade, not because it comes from ego, but because it comes from a truth no one can deny. But now we enter far more delicate ground. Because until now we've talked about silence as power. But what if your silence isn't strength anymore? What if you're not gaining anything by staying quiet, only losing yourself? There are moments when the game is no longer about dominating, but about emotional survival. When it's no longer about having the last word, but about not losing your soul in the process. Because some silences are not strength. They're muted screams from someone who's been domesticated. And that's where the dark side of this strategy begins. That point where calm becomes a cage, where silence is no longer a choice, but a learned behavior. Do you know what's crueler than being silenced by others? Being conditioned to believe that silence is your only option. To believe that swallowing your anger, conceding in arguments, and giving in constantly for the sake of harmony is maturity. That letting it slide, looking the other way, accepting everything in silence, is a sign of being evolved. And while you convince yourself of that, someone else is building an empire on your ability to stay quiet. Nietzsche saw it with brutal clarity. What you call peace is often just submission dressed up. That calm you market as virtue is actually the price you pay for not wanting to disturb. And there are people who smell it, sense it, exploit it, because they know you won't react. They know you'll always choose better not to say anything. And so they take your time, your boundaries, your energy, while you justify it with nobility. This is where one of Nietzsche's sharpest concepts enters. Slave morality. A value system built by those who have no power, created to survive under those who do. A morality of surrender, of forced kindness, of sweetened obedience. You've been taught that it's a virtue not to make waves, not to speak up, not to defend yourself. That being good means letting things slide. That being mature means always giving in. But that's not virtue. It's domestication. It's living in chains and thanking the chains. And Nietzsche didn't write for the ones who settle. He wrote for the ones who dare to break that mold. For those who understand that silence can be a fortress or a prison. And if you still don't know which silence you're living in, don't worry. In the next part, we'll rip that mask off completely. I'll show you how to recognize whether your silence comes from power or from fear. Nietzsche wrote for those who can no longer tolerate living in a lowered voice, for those who are tired of asking for permission to exist, for those who open their eyes realize they're being used, and decide to stop participating in their own submission. Because that silence that breaks you inside, that forces you to swallow every discomfort, every injustice, every crossed boundary, that silence is not peace. It's surrender in disguise. Every time you choose silence to avoid conflict, to not seem aggressive, to keep a fake sense of harmony, you are giving away your power. You're abandoning your own narrative to live inside someone else's expectations. You're no longer yourself. You're what others need you to be. And that, exactly that, is the opposite of what Nietzsche called the will to power. Because true power doesn't shout. It doesn't impose itself through volume. It's exercised in silence, not because it's afraid, but because it owes nothing to anyone. Silence born from inner mastery, from absolute clarity about who you are and what you will never negotiate. That is the silence that transforms. Submissive silence must die. It has to die. And in its place, a new kind of presence must be born. One that doesn't bend, doesn't apologize, doesn't need to dress itself up in clever phrases or perfect arguments. A presence that, by simply existing, reorganizes the energy of the room. That is the silence Nietzsche respected. The silence of someone who has already become the master of himself, who no longer needs to speak to impose, who observes, calculates, waits, and acts only when he decides it matters. Because he knows that even a single word can carry the weight of the entire universe. But how do you get there? How do you stop being the emotionally predictable, easily manipulated person and become someone impenetrable? How do you kill the slave morality inside you and rise again as an individual who imposes respect simply by entering the room? The answer is clear. Embody the Übermensch. Not as an abstract philosophical idea, but as a concrete stance, a way of living, a daily decision to stop reacting like everyone else and start acting like very few, to stop justifying yourself, to stop begging for approval, to stop betraying yourself, because the world already has enough mouths shouting. What it needs now are eyes that do not blink, backs that do not bend, silences that make people uneasy, presences that lead. And if you've made it this far, then you've already felt that call. You already know your silence will no longer be an absence. It will be a brutal affirmation. So now, I'll leave you with one question. Don't answer too fast. Don't overthink it. Just feel it. How much longer will you keep silencing who you are, just to fit into a world that will never understand you? And if this video touched something inside you, leave one phrase in the comments. My silence is not submission, it's sovereignty. It will be our secret signal, to know that you are not part of the noise, that you've already understood. And if you want to keep breaking everything that keeps you small, subscribe, because what's coming is not content, it's dynamite. Until next time, or maybe you won't see me, maybe you'll just feel me in your next uncomfortable silence. Nietzsche wrote for those who can no longer tolerate living in a lowered voice, for those who are tired of asking permission to exist, for those who open their eyes, realize they're being used, and decide to stop participating in their own submission. Because that silence that breaks you inside, that forces you to swallow discomfort, to surrender space, to anesthetize your truth, that silence is not peace. It's betrayal. Every time you stay quiet just to avoid discomfort, just to prevent conflict, just to protect a fake sense of harmony, you're giving away something you shouldn't. Your center, your will. You're handing over the steering wheel of your life just to avoid making waves. And that is exactly what Nietzsche called an offense against life itself. Your silence needs to change tone. It can no longer be a hiding place. It must become a boundary, a blade, an invisible declaration of your sovereignty. Not because others understand you, but because you've already decided never to betray yourself again. The silence that matters is not the one that avoids. It's the one that defines, the one that marks territory, the one that stands like a frontier and says, without speaking, "This is as far as you go." That is the silence of the Übermensch, the one who no longer negotiates with masks, the one who doesn't need to shout, convince, or explain, the one who knows their worth and lives from it, even if no one understands. Do you have that kind of courage? Then leave this sentence in the comments. I choose the silence that commands respect. It's not just a comment. It's a commitment, a way of declaring without explaining that you're no longer here to be accepted. You're here to be authentic, that your presence, even in silence, weighs more than 1,000 screaming voices. And if you made it this far, don't stop. The next video is fundamental. It expands what you've just unlocked and takes your mind to places most are too afraid to go. Watch it. Not for me, but because you deserve it. Remember this: the weak scream, the wise remain silent, and true power chooses when to speak. See you in the next one. Or maybe you won't see me. Maybe you'll just feel me. In that uncomfortable silence no one will ever manipulate again.